Living with Substance Abuse is the first in a series of AROOF town hall meetings to be held around the state. AROOF is a year-long project examining housing and homelessness issues in Alaska, produced by KTOO Public Media and 360 North. Contributors include the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, and the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence Juneau, in partnership with the Juneau Clean Air Coalition.
Welcome to Living with Substance Abuse, a AROOF Town Hall discussion. I'm your host, Casey Kelly. The U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness estimates that nearly half of all people who experience homelessness have some sort of substance abuse issue. Substance abuse can be both a cause and a consequence of homelessness. Our panel tonight is made up of service providers as well as a few people who've been on the other side seeking services and help for substance abuse and homelessness. We'll introduce our panel now. Sitting on my right is Bruce Van Dusen. He's Executive Director of the Polaris House, a nonprofit clubhouse community in Juneau dedicated to recovery from mental illness. Next to him is John Evans, a native artist in recovery who lives in Juneau and used to be homeless. He's been sober for 5 years now. Next to John is Jennifer Brown, Director of the Mental Health Unit and Rainforest Recovery Center at Juneau's Bartlett Regional Hospital. Hi, Jennifer. Jeannette Lacey Dunn is the lead social work case manager at Bartlett Hospital. She helped create an outpatient program providing services to people with frequent emergency room visits. Mariya Lovishchuk is Executive Director of the Glory Hole Emergency Shelter, Soup Kitchen, and Care Center in Juneau, a position she's held since 2009. Hi, Mariya. And our guest, Nancy Burke, is Senior Program Director for the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority. She oversees housing and long-term services and has worked in social services since 1988. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
As we talk, we'll be taking questions from our audience, and if you have a question, we just want you to step up to the microphone, and as your question arises, and we'll just call on you to ask your question. But first, I'd like to get to know our panel a little bit better, so I'm going to start with Bruce, and just have you explain a little bit more about the Polaris House and the Clubhouse concept.
Well, Polaris House is a member of Clubhouse International. Our organization has over 400 clubhouses in over 30 countries, and we are dedicated to helping persons who are living with a mental illness diagnosis. And our focus is on housing, employment, and education. And we do that by engaging the members in the daily operation of the clubhouse as a business. And through that, they develop the self-confidence, self-worth that can allow them to move out into the community and access greater opportunities.
And I should have mentioned, you also have struggled with substance abuse in your past?
Yes, I have. I've been homeless, alcoholism and drug addiction, as well as a number of psychiatric stays and psychiatric medications. I'm clean and sober now for a little over 19 years. And after the homelessness, I was able to get into college and got a degree. And I've been working in the mental health field since 1990.
Great, thank you. John, you've struggled with substance abuse, as we mentioned. How long have you been sober, and what keeps you busy now?
Well, I've been sober now. September 1st will be 5 years. And I've been keeping myself sober by doing my native artwork. And I've been doing it since I was 16 years old. I learned in high school and was taking a native art class and started off making dolls and doing some beadwork, and then we had a person come over and teach us how to do the basic carving, like on the plaque here, and do the drawing. And from there I expanded to drumsticks, halibut hooks, masks, as well as other types of art. So that's pretty much what really keeps me sober today.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit more about Rainforest Recovery Center?
Sure. Rainforest Recovery Center is a comprehensive treatment facility. We have many different services that we offer. We have residential treatment, we have inpatient or intensive outpatient and outpatient services. We also provide an ESP program, which is also called an Emergency Services Program, that patrols in the community and helps acutely intoxicated individuals come to a safe place to stay, what we call sleep off.
Okay. Jeannette, can you talk about how the program you developed is different from or similar to Rainforest Recovery?
Sure. The outpatient case management program is out of the emergency room, and it really started because the hospital was seeing frequent patients in the hospital, which is a common phenomenon across the country. And one of the national trends right now is to have emergency room case management to help address some of the issues that aren't really treated by physicians and nurses in the emergency room. They're more social issues. So I actually worked with San Francisco General Hospital to follow their model, and it gives me an opportunity to meet with individuals who have frequent visits and try to find out what the underlying causes are for their visits to the emergency room, so I can connect them with the services that they need, may it be for their mental health, for chemical dependency, for housing, for all of the above. In addition to that role with the direct service with the individuals, I spend a lot of time with community agencies and statewide agencies to improve services and to work on service development for the gap areas that we have across our state and in our community. So,
great. Mariya, you run the Glory Hole. It's an emergency shelter and soup kitchen, as we mentioned. But even though it's not part of your primary mission, I guess, how often do you run into substance abuse?
I think that we run into substance abuse all the time. I think that we all know that the individuals who are experiencing homelessness often have substance abuse issues, and so we see it pretty much every day.
Great. And Nancy, can you tell us about the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority and how it relates to homelessness?
Sure. The Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority is a public corporation that provides funding for organizations like many that have been discussed here that are really addressing the needs of our beneficiaries. Our beneficiaries include people who experience a mental illness, those with a developmental disability, elders with Alzheimer's disease or related dementia conditions, and then people with chronic substance abuse. And so we try to determine the factors that are impacting our beneficiaries, particularly if they're becoming homeless as a result of their disabling conditions, and we try to partner with agencies. We have grants that are able to go out to work with communities, and we also do a fair amount of planning. We've been involved in some of the housing programs, the Housing First planning, and implementing that model in the state.
All right, we hope to talk a little bit more about Housing First as this program continues. But let's go back to John and Bruce, since you guys have each sought treatment in the past, and maybe you've struggled with substance abuse. Can you talk about when you realized that you really needed help? And we'll start with Bruce.
Well, the years leading up to that moment when I realized I needed help were many, actually, because I had started out with drugs and alcohol as a teenager. And by the time I was 14, I was alcoholic, and at 15, I was a drug addict. And I went on that course for about the next 15 years before I got to a point where I realized that I needed help. The point where I was at when I realized I needed help was when I was standing on a street corner, homeless, and I had basically been just panhandling money so I could get more alcohol, and eating in soup kitchens and that sort of thing. And what hit me was that I realized that I wasn't going to be able to stop drinking, that no matter what I did, I was going to drink again, and I didn't want to. And so it was literally driving me mad, because I would pick myself up out of the gutter in the morning, say to myself, I'm not going to drink today, I'm going to try to find a way out, but then by afternoon I'm out doing whatever I have to do to get another drink, because I just can't stop the urge and the craving. I'm just obsessed with it. And it was at that point I knew I was done and I needed help.
And was alcohol your primary?
Alcohol and marijuana. I know there's discussion about marijuana not being addictive, but in my case, I started smoking heavily when I was 13, and I believe that I was psychologically addicted to it, if you could phrase it that way, because I needed it. In my head, I was either looking to find it and use it, or I was very unhappy. And so I think I was dependent upon it in that sense, yes.
Okay. John, what about you? When was the moment that you realized that you needed some help?
I would say fairly recently, back in 2008, my father had passed away, and I was 35 at the time, and that kind of woke me up because I thought to myself, well, I'm going down the same road as my dad. He's an alcoholic, and I'm 35, I'm too young. And I knew I had a problem. I've been struggling with it for years with alcohol, smoking pot, and I decided I just wanted to live. I've gone through treatment 3 times before, and the 4th time I went through treatment, and that was my focal point. It got me back into my native artwork. I built my first drum there, and I just kept at it and got myself back into church, going to AA, and now I'm in the Bible study, and you know, I really do got to thank the Lord for this. You know, to be able to share my artwork too with the people and share our culture, my culture. I'm both Tlingit and Tsimshian, so I share that. But it was a real turning point in my life when my father passed away. I struggled with it since I was a teenager, and off and on as a teenager, more, you know, to kind of fit in with the crowd. And then after I turned 22, that's when I actually started having a problem with it, and I became homeless and lived on the streets for 13 years, in and out of the glory hole, and panhandling like Bruce, panhandling for money to get my next beer, and being kicked out of places, multiple places, and yeah, I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired.
We often hear that alcoholism, drug addiction, those are things that are passed down through generations. Do you think you learned that behavior from your father?
I definitely think it's a learned behavior, and both of my parents are alcoholics, and so, and some of my other family too had struggled with alcohol. So as a child growing up, I watched them drink, and so it was kind of a normal thing for me to see that. So, and then to see it, other adults in the bars or whatever, it was just like a thing to do. So.
And you mentioned you'd been to treatment 4 times before it finally took, and Bruce, similar experience for you?
I've been in treatment 3 times, yeah. On the question of genetics or hereditary propensity, or whatever you want to call it, in my family, my mother and father never drank, never used drugs. My grandparents were not alcoholics or drug users. So I don't know about the genetics or inheriting it as a disease, but I do know that I used it enough to become an alcoholic and a drug addict.
Mm-hmm. Let's bring in some of our service providers. How typical are these stories that John and Bruce have just told us? Jennifer?
They're very typical, and this is what we see on a day-to-day basis at the treatment center.
Mm-hmm. And Jeannette?
Yeah, I would have to agree, and I think the repeated number of times in treatment is also something that I see a lot, is that one time through treatment is not usually. I see a lot of people who've been through many times, and encouraging people to not give up is something that we spend time doing, is saying, okay, well, you've been through treatment once and that didn't work, then try again and try again, because I don't believe in ever giving up, because it might be the 4th time or the 5th time or the 10th time through treatment. So we want to keep offering that to folks who are struggling with this.
I would have to agree with that. I actually had been to an AA meeting in 1980, and they pointed out to me that I had an alcohol problem, and I was able to see that they were right. And from 1980 on in through about 1991, I went to hundreds of AA meetings. But I also took a lot of start-over tokens too. I had a lot of relapses, but that point is you just can't give up. You have to keep trying.
What made you go to that first one? What was the impetus?
Oh, well, I was newly discharged from the Navy, and I had burned out family relations. I was risky to be around because of my drug use and other things. But at that particular point in my life, I was in a period of homelessness, and they were telling me that in order for me to be able to get into this particular treatment program, I had to go to AA meetings. So that's why I started going to those meetings then.
Right. Mariya, do you, is it typical, are these typical stories from the populations that you serve at the Glory Hole?
I think we are typical, and I think what is most heartbreaking about it is just kind of seeing how people really, really try. You know, and people come into the Glory Hole. We have a breathalyzer policy, and so you cannot be at the Glory Hole if your blood alcohol level is above 0.1. And people come into the Glory Hole, and they are trying to use the Glory Hole as a place where we can rehab before we get into treatment. And then they go into treatment, and it's really wonderful because we really want to go. We really want to do something about the condition that they have, and then they come back to the Glory Hole after treatment, and then we see that cycle happen kind of over and over again. But I think it is really wonderful to hear the fact that there are other social service providers who think that people should definitely not give up and keep on going to treatment until it works, and obviously it can work.
Bruce, can you talk about how you made the transition from needing services to now being a service provider?
Yeah, from
in a way.
needing services to providing services, yeah. And that would have to go into what really happened to start my own recovery. In 1990, I was introduced to a group of persons in Indiana. They were the Key Consumer Organization, but it was a peer-run organization. It was a business that was owned and operated by persons living with a mental illness diagnosis. And they took me in, and they had faith in me, and they had confidence in me at a time when I didn't. They were talking to me about how they wanted to hire me and give me a job and a place to work. And at that point, my idea of what my life was supposed to be was to stay on my medications, stay clean and sober, and stay out of the hospital. I'd been trying to do that for 10 years. It hadn't really been working out very well. But they took me in, had confidence in me, gave me a little bit of training, and then hired me as a staff person. So that was one thing. That was one thing. The second thing that happened at the same time, and this is kind of that story about how the planets all lined up at the right moment. The second thing that happened was I got into a research program in a hospital for schizophrenia, and they tried me on an experimental drug. And I had to commit to taking the medication for 2 years to get in the program. So I started on the medication. I was getting really, really good peer support. I knew where the AA meetings were. I could go to the AA meetings, and through a combination of those things, it really got me up to a point where I was getting away from the drugs and the alcohol, and I was doing something meaningful, something that mattered to other people. And then I also had a way to get my symptoms of schizophrenia under control. And so those things all coming together at the same time really put me on it was just amazing change, because within 6 months of all this happening, I was actually elected or voted in as the vice president of that key consumer organization. And then within another few months, I was actually the president of the board. So in those first years, while I was in college and really getting some sober and clean time together, I was leading an organization as well. And that really made a big difference, those things coming together at the same time. And then, of course, I'd have to say, too, that it was also my willingness. I was not giving up. I was keeping trying and keeping trying. And so that had a lot to do with it. When those things made themselves available, I was there and I still kept trying.
Yeah. You mentioned peer support, and just going back to some of our service providers here, you talk about that model of, treating people who might have some sort of mental illness or some sort of substance abuse issue, and how important is that, network for those folks?
I think the network is really critical to being successful outside of treatment. While Rainforest doesn't have a formal peer support program, I think within the treatment community, individuals find the supports, and then we also work to engage people in outside meetings, like with AA and NA, things like that, to get them reconnected and get some supports prior to leaving residential treatment. Again, it's making those connections, and so many of the people we see have problems with their support systems, so it's key.
And Jeannette, what would you have to say? How important are peer support systems and networks for people who struggle with these issues?
Yeah, I think that the peer support networks are also, I agree with Jennifer that they're critical. I also picked up on some of the things that Bruce said about that he went to the first AA meeting because it was required for housing. And I just think that's a really important piece to hold on to, because that housing piece and having that opportunity for a stable environment, that is the bottom layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if we don't have housing options available, working on those next levels, you really can't get there. And then the other piece that I really picked up on, Bruce, was that you made a connection with an individual or a group of individuals who had confidence in you. So that worked on your esteem. And so that gave you a sense of self that said you're worth continuing to improve your condition. And so I think those things, stabilizing with meeting basic needs, and then being around people who have true empathy, that's really critical, and people who really believe that you have value. And so I think that that's a big message for all of our service providers and anybody working with the population.
People who'd been in my shoes,
Right.
and they knew where I was walking, and they knew that they could help me walk out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good transition point to the work that Nancy's doing with the Mental Health Trust Authority on Housing First programs. And can you talk about Housing First and strategies for dealing with homelessness and substance abuse? Can you describe that model for dealing with those issues?
Sure. And the people here have been doing a beautiful job of describing it, because it's really about housing people so that lives can be put back together. And our understanding of what drives addiction is in its infancy, really. If you look at the history of science, we don't know everything we need to know about the brain and how it works and addictions. And so as we learn more about the field, we have things that we know that work, and they work for different people in different ways. And so some people might go through treatment and they might respond the first time, they might be back out and they might be good to go. Other people, like the folks in Seattle, when they started their Housing First program, the average number of treatment attempts was 19. And so you get someone who's gone through treatment and failed 19 times, that's actually the average. You can't help but have the message that this doesn't work for me, or that there's something wrong with me. And then esteem is gone, hope is gone, there's nothing. And so what Seattle did was they took a look at that and they said, well, maybe it's us, the providers. Maybe, we don't understand everything we need to know. Maybe we need to just help people get into housing, give them the tools, give them the resources that they need to continue their path. And it includes a heavy dose of peer support, access to medications if people, if they're pursuing that, but the ability to pursue what you need on an individual basis, instead of saying, here's what you have to do to have housing, you have to go to AA, you have to complete treatment, which for most people was a non-starter. And so here's everything you have to do to have that basic need met. It didn't work. So they flipped the paradigm, and they put housing first, as the name suggests, and then they work with people to develop a treatment plan that's specific to you. And so one of the problems we have with treatment is it's sort of happening in a learning lab. It's a live person, and so treatment might be effective while you're in that setting, and it might work until you hit a life experience that re-triggers it. And that's why you see so many people going back through, because the way we process things and the way that we have memories stored, you can re-trigger things that you have not worked through. And so it's more of a cyclical type arrangement instead of a linear one. But all of our programs are set up for you to, in a linear way, progress through treatment and then housing and then job. And so we're flipping it, and we're saying, well, let's do housing, and let's see what people need, and let's see what gives you hope. Is it a job? Is it re-engaging with your family? Is it volunteering at your church? Is it reconnecting with your faith community? What is it for you? And housing is the way that we can do it. And so that's in a nutshell.
Bruce?
One thing that we didn't mention in our introductions is we also have a residential program. We house 4 men. We want to make it bigger because we know there's a need. But that's exactly what we do, is it's housing. It's not attached to treatment. It's not attached to sobriety or clean time. It's what do we have to do to help that person to a point where they can maintain their own housing. And we do encourage them to seek treatment when necessary for whatever it might be. But we really want to give them an opportunity to get into a routine and to build a foundation so that they can maintain their own housing. So we had to detach it from treatment, because the fellows that are living there now, I hate the term, but I don't know what else to call it, they had treatment failures. They just didn't do well in traditional types of treatment programs. They had failure after failure there. So we're housing them, and that's what we're doing. And I can tell you, as the administrator or director, it can be fun on a day-to-day basis. I'm not really sure what I'm going to wake up to some days, but that's the whole point, is that opportunity to get in, to get those things under their belt that they need to have so that they can maintain housing. And we've got one that's a college student right now. He's doing very well. We've got a fellow that just moved in a couple months ago, but he's already interested in work. And then there's a couple other guys that have made a lot of progress on certain things. But it's not attached to the housing. We'll provide the services or find the right people to give the services, but we're providing a bed and meals and a safe, dry, comfortable place with the right supports for different things.
John, how important was that for you when you were trying to clean up, just getting yourself into a stable living situation?
It was very important. When I went through mine, I was staying at the Aurora's Watch over in Sitka, and after I got out of the Bill Brady program, and I had a counselor there that just continually supported me verbally by giving me compliments all the time and telling me that I'm worth something and value, and that to me meant a lot. Even though it took a while in the beginning, I didn't want to believe it, but after a while, the more she started encouraging me and complimenting me, the more I started to believe it and believe in myself. My self-esteem was starting to pick up again. I was working, and I stayed sober for 9 months the first time, and I relapsed for a month, and then got in trouble, spent some time in jail, and then after I got out, I just continued down the path of wellness. I got into Bible study, got into church, and got into retreats, the men's Acts retreats and the men's Word retreat. And from there, the staff of both the retreats, I developed a safety net of people that I can pick up the phone anytime I want and give them a call if I'm struggling. So that's where my support is, right there.
And when you were homeless, did you have a safety net like that? Did you have?
No, the only people that I had were other alcoholics and people like me. So.
And what's your current living situation now?
Right now, I live with a man who is an ordained minister, and my mom. She came up from Montana after my stepdad had passed away, and so I've been helping her because she's had brain aneurysms, and so she has a memory problem, and so she needs some assistance, not much, but some. So it's great to live with her and be around her. So.
Nancy, just back to the housing first concept, is there some controversy over it? And I mean, if you wouldn't mind just talking about what is the controversy and how do you respond to people who don't quite get the housing first concept?
I think there used to be a lot of controversy over it, but increasingly in the two communities where we've established housing first programs, Anchorage and Fairbanks, particularly in Anchorage, there was a lot of concern over the location of the program and where people should reside. But that program's been up and running for 2 years now, and we're seeing similar outcomes from that program that Seattle saw. There's been, in Seattle, after their 2-year evaluation, they saw a 30% reduction in drinking of the residents. And in Anchorage, we're very pleased to hear that we have 8 people who are completely sober now. And we have 1 person who's gone back and completed a training program to become a certified nursing assistant and is working full time. And so we see those very similar results, probably overall a 30% reduction in drinking. And then more than 80% of the people remain stable for a long period of time. And Seattle saw those same numbers. So people who were on the street, really chronically homeless, are now stable because they're in their own homes and they have a door that they can lock at night. And they feel safe to start working on some of the things that were really troublesome. And so I think increasingly we're not seeing quite the controversy that we used to, but for a community that's not familiar with it, we might see some folks raise concern about, and particularly if I can think back of some of the things that I've heard said, why would we house those folks? They appear to be maybe not asking for help. I've heard the statement that people prefer to live on the street. That's a lifestyle choice. And to those folks, I cite some of the other numbers: Seattle, Denver, and New York City. Seattle's just the closest community, and we've watched it as they've rolled out their program. For 75 units, they had to approach 79 people on the street to ask if they wanted housing. And we've seen those very same acceptance rates, that when people understand that this isn't housing with a long to-do list that you have to do to keep it, but housing that's yours, and then we'll help you figure out your to-do list. I think that another thing that is a concern for communities and neighbors is, it'll be, I think people envision like Animal House, like, okay, everybody's gonna go there, it's gonna be this huge party, it's gonna spill out on the street. In Anchorage, we heard that like every morning the party's just gonna roll out into the neighborhood and we're gonna be overwhelmed by all this activity. And we worked with the community to understand that you do see those reductions in drinking, and a lot of the drinking behavior that happens on the street is a coping mechanism for people who have other underlying conditions, or just to deal with the fact that you don't know where you're sleeping that night and you would rather just pass out and drink until you pass out instead of having to face the fact that you'll be under a bridge, or you don't know where you're going. So working with the community that there's rules in Housing First. You have to pay your rent, you have to be a good neighbor, you can't destroy your property, there's absolutely no violence, and you give back to the community. And those are the, people volunteer, they shovel the snow, they do those things. So really, I think as people just learn about the model and what it is and what it is not, the comfort level goes up.
Right. Mariya, how does the, Housing First differ from what you do at the Glory Hole?
So the Glory Hole is an emergency shelter, and so we provide people with an emergency shelter. An emergency shelter is just that, it's emergency shelter. The Glory Hole has 43 beds, and they are in dorms, and so you have 8 people 10 people and then more people all in the same room. And those living conditions are definitely not ideal living conditions for adults in the United States. And so ideally what happens is that people go into the glory hole, which is an emergency shelter. They stay there, and then they can go to other places. We can move into permanent supportive housing because, you know, they got a job. Or if they keep on cycling in and out of the glory hole, there obviously is some kind of problem. And if it is related to alcohol, and if, you know, the glory hole has been seeing the same people for 13 years, you know, then it's pretty obvious that something is not working, because an emergency shelter is not a good permanent place for people to be. And so then people, you know, need to go somewhere else. And so Housing First is not emergency shelter, it is permanent supportive housing where people can stay, be stable, and you know, have a safe, good space from which to grow.
I think we sometimes we think about this as a linear progression, that, well, if you can do well in emergency shelter, then you can move into housing. And you know, I think about all of us, you know, I've been on camping trips where we all sleep in one big, you know, lodge or something. And I think about how well I function when I'm in a really loud, you know, there's kids running around, there's all kinds of activity, and then how I function when I can just kind of be at my house and go to my room if you know, lots is happening at the house. And so it really is not a natural, it's not a linear kind of progression. But I think for Juneau in particular, the communities that we've worked with have done what we call a vulnerability assessment. And that identifies people who are more likely to pass away on the street because of underlying medical, mental health, and addictions. And Juneau actually has the highest rate of disabling conditions of the population that are on the street of the 3 communities that have completed that assessment. And so, you know, if you take people who have an underlying mental illness or a medical problem, combined with oftentimes an addiction, and it's congregate living. And so you go to the glory hole, which is a really, you know, it's a great place to be. People are caring and loving, but it's congregate living. And if you have those underlying conditions, it can only make it harder for you to, you know, kind of keep moving on what you need to do. And people oftentimes just fall back into addiction.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Jennifer. Did you have something to add to that?
Well, and I appreciate that. I mean, I think that's what we see every day in treatment also. It's almost like we're setting people up to fail because the treatment models are kind of this linear progression too. Here we have you in residential treatment. We'll keep you, but, you know, have to do these certain things, and then I don't know if we'll be able to find you housing. You know, at the end of this, I don't know what your plan is. And your plan may be to end up at the glory hole. And then, so here you have someone who's worked very hard in a supportive environment, done very well, and then it's like we're setting them up to fail. And these are also individuals who are not always very well. They have a lot of other comorbidities, including the mental health issues. You know, at Rainforest, over 40% of the individuals we treat have a co-occurring mental illness. So we're working with the substance abuse, we're working with the mental illness, and then we also have the medical comorbidities, the diabetes, the heart disease. We work with a lot of people with traumatic brain injuries and things like that, and it's all very complicated. And, you know, at the end of the treatment, it's almost like, well, you know, do your best, and it's just not a good situation. We're not meeting those, like you were talking about Maslow's hierarchy. We're setting you back out into the chaos that you came from. So.
That's an important point about Housing First. Is I describe Housing First as extended engagement. So for people who haven't been successful in treatment, you know, you can be in a Housing First program, and you can actually go all the way through treatment and still choose to live in the Housing First environment. But that's your choice, instead of having to, you know, you've graduated now from Housing First and you're going to have to move on. You can live there. It's permanent supported housing, and you can choose to stay. But some people, when they are completing treatment, find it helpful to not live in an environment with people with active addictions who are in varying places of trying to work on that. And we need to put at the other end of our continuum supported housing for sober living. And sometimes when people hear us talk about, well, housing first is the deal, housing first is the deal for a lot of people who the system isn't working for, but we really need a continuum of options of housing. And so that's why the trust has been really focused on many different types of housing.
So yeah, that idea that you just offer a house and the people there can continue to, drink or use drugs. That's part of the controversy that I was talking about. But
Yes.
You're saying that it helps people overcome those addictions because from there you can pin down what their specific issues are that are
Yes.
leading to the drug and alcohol abuse.
And there's very active, enriched social services on site. So every day you will get 2 or 3 different knocks on your door. Housekeeping is a really important component of Housing First. It's a way of ensuring that a person's safe in their home, in their apartment, and a way to sort of help them maintain living that will respect the unit. But it is also a way to give you something to talk about. Oh, hey, so I noticed you have some bills there on the table. Did you want to go through those? Do you know what's happening with your bills, or things that you need to pay attention to? And that gives you the opportunity to be there. And so, in the Housing First programs that we've set up in Anchorage and other places, there's at a minimum in the hours when people might be sleeping 2 or 3 people on staff. But during those busy hours where there's, people might be getting dinner, or they might be up and working on their house, or cleaning their home, or sorting through their mail, we could have 7 people on staff and case managers visiting. It's very service enriched, so that you're not just left there to sort of sort it out on your own. Somebody's really there engaging you every day, finding out what you're doing and how it's going.
And there was a point early in my recovery where housing, stable housing, not contingent on whether I drank or used, gave me like breathing room where I got to a point where, okay, my housing is secure. I can relax a little bit. And then in that process, I was able to see that, well, this is getting to a point with the drugs and the alcohol where I can give this up. I don't have the crutch on it. It doesn't do for me what it was doing for me. And I'm at a point where I feel secure and safe enough and got calm enough in my own mind to be able to see that I really need to leave this alone. I need to get away from that. And so yeah, stable, safe housing is very important.
I just want to remind our studio audience, if you have any questions, just step up to the microphone. It looks like we do have our first question.
Well, I have a question. We have people who are couch surfing, who sometimes have a place to live, sometimes don't have, sort of flexible living standards. How do they avail themselves of services? How do they find that place before they reach crisis and end up in the hospital or something? Is there a route that they can go to before the police or someone else has entered the situation?
That might be a good, Jeannette or Jennifer, you want to jump in here?
Well, I think it kind of depends on what sort of services they're looking for. Are you talking about services for chemical dependency, mental health?
I'm talking about housing services.
Housing
someone
services.
who is having substance abuse problems, but perhaps hasn't risen to the level that the police have arrested him or her yet. Someone who is toying with the idea of prostitution because they can't make, they don't know where an affordable rental place is, but they know a guy that will put them up for favors. How do we help that person?
Right, and so, I think that we're sort of 2 answers to that question. One answer is that Juneau has, as we all know, a really, really acute shortage of affordable housing for anybody, not just necessarily people who are about to experience homelessness or, are of any socioeconomic class. I mean, I think that we just have a very short supply of housing. So that's kind of the first answer. So that's bad. But the good thing is that the Juneau Coalition on Housing and Homelessness has been doing a really good job recently on working together as a continuum. And so, there is a concept called centralized intake. And so the idea is that a person can walk into any social service agency and that the agencies will be able to refer them to another agency on the continuum of care. So I know that the Glory Hole gets calls all the time for services that the Glory Hole does not provide, like substance abuse, medical, legal, and we're able to refer them to there. And so I think that most agencies probably have a similar level of knowledge. So I would just really recommend picking up the phone, calling the Glory Hole or calling any other agency. But there is a Glory Hole has a website, www.feedjuneau.org, and on the website we have a guide for what people, for what services are available, be they food services, shelter services, etc. And the Juneau Coalition on Housing and Homelessness also has that information available on their website.
So Jeannette or Jennifer, do you want to jump in and add anything to that? Where do people find out about?
Yeah, I think Mariya is right. I mean, I think because it's so individualized about what the person's needs might be, if it's, somebody who's experiencing domestic violence, there's aware, or if there's somebody whose primary issues are mental health, and JME is a resource, and they're also an agency that could refer out to other services, the hospital, social workers, Rainforest. I mean, I think most of the service providers in town would take that call, get a little bit more information, and figure out what the right agency to refer that person to is. But I agree with Mariya, our housing options are very limited, and so we're trying to find out what other issues that they're dealing with so that we can connect them with a supported agency that's also going to support some of the underlying issues that may be related to their homelessness.
And we try, very hard to really just know and refer and not duplicate services. Like I have Jeanette's number on my cell phone. Today I think we called each other twice, and they think that's really not unusual.
Right.
We have really, really strong relationships with other social service agencies, and everybody just really tries to work together.
I think that's really probably one of the greatest things about Juneau is that we are all really well connected in the social services agencies, and we are all trying to work toward the same goal. And so we do work very closely with each other and have each other's cell phone numbers. And so we have these things that come up, and we are very interrelated and interconnected with the services that we're trying to provide.
So Bruce?
Then at Polaris House, when we find one of our members has a problem with housing, we really have to find normal housing. We have to find apartment buildings or room and board and that sort of thing for that person to access. And it can be extremely difficult. We're talking about folks that don't have a lot of money and don't have a lot of resources. Now, we've been successful with housing all of our members who've come up with issues on housing, but it takes a lot of man hours to get that done. And we're fortunate too. We're starting to develop good relationships with some of the landlords, and really providing the supports that our members need so they can be good tenants. Right. And that makes a big difference.
Is that a big struggle? Just getting people to, I mean, they're obviously in it to make a profit. They want to.
Well, I mean, it has its selling points because I can go to a landlord and I can say, this person will pay rent each month. They have guaranteed income. It's not a lot, but it's going to be there on the first of each month. There's no doubt about that. And then I can talk to the landlord and say, we provide a lot of other supports for this person. So if you found, say, for example, they were smoking indoors, we can fix that. We can work with that person. We get them through that so they're not smoking indoors. Or if they're not supposed to have pets, we can get like an inroad into that. Get the pet out of the apartment before the landlord wants to evict the person.
Nancy, I mean, you heard all the Juneau folks up here say they've all got each other on speed dial, right? Is that pretty typical of social service providers statewide?
I think yes, it is. It's in fact, I know of when people come to different communities, that I've actually heard of providers that network across the communities as well. It's kind of a small state, really. And then the Juneau Homeless Coalition is partnered with our statewide homeless coalition and Anchorage's homeless coalition. Particularly in the housing circles, I think there is that access to each other.
And I'm still the new kid on the block. I'm still making connections, so I've been in Juneau for less than a year.
So we have another question from an audience member. Step right up.
Thank you. This is a question for Jennifer, I think. It seems like treatment is key to making life changes after housing or before housing, whenever, but treatment is the trigger to success. I know people, when they're ready to get treatment, they may end up on a waiting list. What is the waiting list at Rainforest? And when you have an opening, what are the chances that person is still waiting to receive that treatment?
Sure, I think that's a valid point. The goal of treatment is to try and engage the individual as soon as they're ready. We don't have waiting lists for our outpatient services. We do have a wait list for our residential beds. And the wait list right now, fortunately, is small. It's about 10.2 days. I think I just figured it out. I was doing my quarterly data. So it's relatively short, but it speaks to there's a lack of treatment beds throughout the state. Rainforest serves more than just Juneau for residential treatment. About 25% of our population comes from outside Juneau and from very populated areas, Anchorage and Fairbanks and such, and even as far north as Nome. So we get people from all over, and then housing also complicates that, because if you're trying to work with someone from a different city who's got issues with homelessness, again, our program is 28 days, so that, in the big picture is a very small time to try and make these tight connections so they can be successful. Again, just to answer your question, 10.2 days, and so far we've been that's relatively short, and people have been able to engage at that point. So,
just continuing on, can you talk a little bit about what people might expect when they go to Rainforest for treatment? You could start with residential and then go to your outpatient.
Sure, just
what they might expect.
Well, the programs are highly structured, especially if you're coming into residential. Residential treatment is meant to be a safe place. And so maybe just to start, just to let you know that people don't kind of pick and choose necessarily what level of treatment they want. Everyone who's seeking a treatment or substance use treatment goes through a very thorough assessment process to determine what level of care you actually need. And so our residential treatment services is very structured, designed to be a safe place for people to be. We have 16 residential beds. We only treat adults at Rainforest. We have mixed gender populations, so males and females. And again, the day is very structured with a lot of groups, educational groups, psychosocial process groups. We also have activities like recreational therapy so that people can get used to doing fun activities while they're sober and see what that's like and how they experience it. Our outpatient programs, we have intensive outpatient and also outpatient. Those are very structured and regimented, and we have some combined groups and do gender-specific groups.
Okay, John, she mentioned recreational opportunities, and you brought some of your artwork here for us to look at. Can you talk about how important that was for you in getting sober, just finding another outlet for whatever it was that was, I guess, making you drink?
Like I said, I started this when I was 16 in high school, and I was a natural with the drawing aspect of it. And it took me a little time to learn how to carve. And so since high school up until the 4th time I went through treatment, I'd done some carving off and on. And I've been at it now for the last 4.5 years full time. But when I went through treatment, it was over at the Bill Brady Center, and it was kind of geared more towards the Native population. So, and we had the recreational director over there teach us how to make different projects, and I was interested in making a drum. So he taught me how to make the drum, and he asked me if I knew how to do the design work. I said, oh yeah, I got this down packed, and went from there. And so he was pretty impressed with the way I quickly learned how to make the drums. And so it was very important for me to keep myself engaged with my cultural heritage, and to be a part of that, and to be able to share it with other folks too. I enjoy doing it, and it's fun.
And we should mention now you work at a Native Crafts Gallery, right, in downtown Juneau? And
Yes, at the Native Craft Co-op, and it's located at 175 South Franklin inside the Senate building. And it's a cooperation of different artists that we represent, about 10 or so different artists that put their work inside the store for sale. And you'll see me down there like 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we're open from 8 to 8 Sunday, 7 days a week. And the owner there, he is an artist himself, and he came and asked me, he says, I'm going to open up a store, would you like to be a part of it? I said, yeah. And it was a great opportunity for me, because now I can sell it on a commission basis. The artist gets 70% of the profit, and the store gets 30%, or 25% for the store, because he has to pay the 5% tax. Mm-hmm. But for the last 3 summers, I was working at Pyramid Beads, and that didn't work out too well, but it got me my start, actually. So,
yeah. Well, and it strikes me that you're downtown, where a lot of the activity is, there's still a lot of homeless people on the street, a lot of people drinking alcohol. When you see it now, how does that make you feel?
It saddens me. It really does. Because I see over the last 20 years that I've been here in Juneau, I've had several of my friends die due to the weather conditions or health conditions or whatever the reason might be. And that's really depressing to me to, see my friends die off, one by one, year by year. And so when I go downtown, people see me, hey John, the folks that I used to drink with, hey, you're looking good, you're doing well. And that encourages me to do well. And I even have police officers say the same thing. They say, hey John, you're looking really good. Keep it up. And so it keeps my self-esteem up and encourages me to keep sober. And in turn, I talk to my other friends and encourage them. Hey, you don't know what you're missing. It's a great lifestyle without the alcohol, without the drugs. And I said, if I can do it, you can do it too. And I've had some other people, my friends that I used to drink with, say, John, you're such an inspiration to me. I want to be like you. I want what you have. And so I say, well, you can do it. It's a choice that you have to make. So it really starts from here, mm-hmm. from yourself.
I'd have to agree with that. When I was standing on that street corner so disconnected from everything. If you had told me that I would be able to own some of the fastest sport bikes in the world, or I was going to be able to take fly-in fishing trips to these outposts, you know, and I just finished a 3-week tour across the United States on the back of a motorcycle. If you had told me that when I was standing out there, I think you're nuts. That's never going to happen. I mean, I'm dead, you know, I'm not going anywhere. But it's important to get that message out about, you know, I won't say that life was going to get good for everybody that gets sober, but you have a chance. You know, when I was out there drinking, I didn't have a chance.
It gets better.
It does that, yeah.
Yeah.
We have another audience question, so we'll go.
This is more about the housing first. You said they are required to pay some rent. What is the degree of participation by the tenant versus how much support is needed on the average by the facility itself? If you have someone you're bringing in that's homeless, they're probably not keeping a job at that point. They're probably not doing things other than perhaps panhandling. Unless they're disabled, maybe they have some disability check or something of that sort. So what's the balance of how much support does it take versus them participating in this?
Right, that's a really great question. It's, in fact, that is the heart of a lot of my job, is helping the sponsors of the housing programs figure out the resources needed to subsidize the tenants. And the subsidy runs the same way that housing vouchers that are available through Alaska Housing Finance Corporation work. The person's required to pay 30% of their income. And when they're first coming into program, they probably don't have any income, but there is a minimum amount of $50. And people can work for that. Panhandling is not allowed once you're in the program. So, you know, the organization will help find opportunities where you can give back, or sometimes they'll accept volunteer labor until the person can reinstate their Social Security benefits or locate some permanent income that they'll need to remain in the housing, but they pay 30% of their income.
So that's part of their commitment, that they'll provide something that.
Yes.
That's the one thing they need to do, is provide the commitment for that.
It's key. It's critical to their feeling ownership for that. You know, but once you're paying rent, you feel like this is mine. You're invested. You want to make sure everything succeeds. You know, it's a very important component of the model.
And does the model have food also? I mean, living in the apartment, if you can't get some food, are these people all going out to go find the glory hole for meals every day? Right. Versus?
No, the meals are part of the program. Well, I should say that Housing First as a model can be, and in some communities is only utilized in community apartments. And so the staff members will be out in whatever apartment that you've rented, helping you sort out. And so in that case, you would have to assist a person in accessing resources to be able to have food, which might also be getting their benefits reinstated so that they have food stamps, or that they have some income that they can purchase their food, and you'd be doing meal planning and helping them figure out what they're going to eat for that week. But in the two programs we've set up in the state, where we're really dealing with people who have the most disabling conditions, people like we were describing, with multiple diagnoses of mental illness and brain injury and addictions, it becomes feasible to do the projects if you co-locate people in one setting, so that you can have an economy of scale to have those support services available. And food is a really important component. We know that if people eat the first meal of the day, they'll be less likely to drink throughout that day because they're not hungry and trying to fill that need. And so breakfast is offered, and then dinner. And the rooms that the person rents, you know, your apartment would have either a hot plate or a microwave or some way to have lunch. So, and each person is worked with so that they can plan that out for the week.
So you mentioned there are two current Housing First projects in Alaska, in Anchorage and Fairbanks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe, I know the one in Anchorage is called Carlick Manor, right?
Yes.
But so what's Carlick Manor? What is how does it work?
Sure. It's a, Carlick Manor is a former hotel that was converted into a Housing First program. It's 46 units, and Rural Cap is the operator, and we have a service partnership between Anchorage Community Mental Health Services and Rural Cap. And between the two organizations, there's that enriched service environment. It's our longest. It opened in November of 2000 and I want to say the right year, 11. And so it's just over 2 years now open, almost 3 years. And we're seeing the successes that I referenced. People are decreasing their drinking and re-engaging. The second program is in Fairbanks and followed very shortly after Anchorage's project. And it's an extremely exciting model because it combines what I think of as the next step. So someone is housed, and then what? They need a job. And so the Fairbanks project really combines a vocational component with the program. It's also a hotel that was in bankruptcy status. And one thing about Fairbanks, there was a local businessman who became convinced that Housing First was needed in their community. And he actually purchased that hotel out of bankruptcy and held it for Tanana Chiefs to sponsor the project. And so that project is a tribally sponsored and run program. It's one of very few in the nation that have that component, that it's primarily tribal people and it's run by tribal folks. But the hotel was larger than what Housing First, what they needed. So there's 47 units of Housing First on one side, and they were able to separate the hotel into a separate side that operates as a hotel. And so there's, when people need to come into Fairbanks for medical services through Chief Andrew Isaac Clinic, or just to visit in town, they're able to operate that side of the project as a hotel, which provides meal service opportunities, laundry service, housekeeping for the residents of the Housing First side to receive training and to assist in the operations of the hotel. So it's very exciting.
And just so we can give credit where credit's due, the businessman that bought the hotel?
Tim Cerny.
Okay.
Yes.
And it was, so he just saw a need and decided, this is what I'm going to do with my money?
He saw the need, and like many members, we've taken one trip of Juneau members to see programs. So the Mental Health Trust Authority has been able to sponsor learning trips. And so I didn't really know who Tim was. He was just on one of the learning trips to Seattle. And after the trip, he approached me and he said, this is what Fairbanks needs. I'm going to do something about this. Mm-hmm. And so he did.
So, and Juneau's been on a similar trip?
We visited Duluth, Minnesota, to a Housing First program there with, one of the things about Juneau and the way that we've been working with Juneau is a very thoughtful process of trying to decide what's needed in the community. And Housing First seems like a right choice for Juneau. So we had members from the city, the police department, Rainforest was with us, housing providers, JAMI was with us. We took those members back to Duluth to see, again, another tribally sponsored program that's operating there. And that's really the way that you help people understand what Housing First is and help them see what it is in action instead of what fears come up or what's been said about it. And so we've taken these learning trips now.
Sure. So Jeannette or Jennifer, can you talk about what do you think Housing First would work in Juneau, and why?
Yeah, I think Housing First is definitely necessary here in Juneau. I think that working with the population that I work with and also residents from Rainforest, one of our biggest challenges is where will these people live and how can we continue their treatment options for them or continue supporting them. And I definitely think that having a model where there's different levels, and I know that this is something that we've talked about where people may enter and still be transitioning. Maybe they won't be fully sober, but maybe they can transition to that level. And I think that having that opportunity with our limited housing resources is an option that might work here too, so that people can remain in the program whether they're sober or not sober, and can have that continuum of care. So
This strikes me as it might be a challenge in Juneau because we do have such limited housing options. It's, you know, the housing market is notoriously tight here. Do you see that as a challenge, or do you think?
Well, I think that's definitely why we need to have the housing first model here, is because of the limited housing options. I think finding the right location, the right property, or building the right property, however that can happen, is absolutely necessary because because it is so difficult. And I know Bruce has difficulty finding housing options.
I mean, we have the transitional housing program. It's not housing first in the sense that we wouldn't allow someone to live there permanently. But we only have 4 beds, but, you know, right off a hand, I can think of, you know, another 4 clubhouse members that could really use some housing supports of that type. I keep my eyes on those guys to keep them from falling all the way out, you know, provide them what support we can. But if we actually had a better housing program for them, we wouldn't have that worry.
I think another thing too that we haven't really talked about yet is the cost shifting of the housing first model versus what we're doing right now. I mean, I know an individual whose medical hospital bills for a 1-year period are $300,000. And so that's one person. And so if you're looking at the number of individuals that could be served in this type of a program and how those resources could be much more, you know, utilized in a much better fashion, I think that's something that we all have to take into consideration, is what are the costs that we're using in our hospital? What are the costs that we're using with our emergency services? What are the other resources, the correctional facilities? Because if these individuals had the housing and had the supportive services, it would really take a lot of pressure off of some of the other services that that we have available and that the city and the state are paying for, that we could save a lot of money.
And that's one way. I mean, you could look at our transitional housing program as being very expensive, but when you take into account that these were men who used ER services a lot, some of the time they spent considerable period.
Sorry, DR services?
ER.
ER.
Emergency
rooms.
Okay.
Yeah. So they were using emergency room services, a number of incarcerations, and then there's also one fellow that had some serious health problems that were he in the hospital having to deal with. That would be very, very expensive. So even though on the surface our budget for our housing may look expensive, when you take into account the amount of resources that these men were using, without it, it's a drop in the bucket, really.
Right.
And also, I think the improved health outcomes that you'll see once, you know, we wrap these services around individuals in supportive housing.
I absolutely agree, and not only health outcomes, but, you know, when you help an individual, you help your community. So, and when you help your community, I mean, you help your state. And so it's not just doing the right thing for one person, it's doing the right thing for all of us as a society. And so I think that we're doing more than just looking at individuals here.
Nancy, when you try and come up, you know, when you're making the pitch for Housing First to communities, is that part of it is this is really cost effective in the long run?
I have several different hats, and I can speak to the economics of the services, how we're doing better with the dollars that we have. One thing that comes up in communities is, well, my property values are just going to plummet if some project like this comes in near. But we actually have studies that show that property values increase when you have a program that has staff on site. And, you know, if you look at Carlick Manor in Anchorage, it's very neat and tidy, and they monitor the direct environment around them so that the businesses, you know, when they're having problems, they can call over to Carlick Manor and, you know, see if someone's available to come and check out a person. If, you know, they're having a homeless person in their business, oftentimes it's not a Carlick Manor resident, it's you know, another homeless person, but they're a resource. They become a resource to the community. And the Harvard study actually found that the property values in neighborhoods where these programs go up slightly. So I can put on that hat. I can talk about, as a clinically trained social worker, I can talk about the value of let's get our models right. I don't think of these people as service or treatment resistant. I think of the system as failing these people. So let's get our system together and figure out what we need to do a better job by the people we're trying to serve. And you just, it all adds up. It's just, it really is the right thing to do.
And I appreciate that comment in the sense that, you mentioned earlier that people are not living homeless by choice.
Right.
In my 52 years, I've only met 2 people that told me they wanted to be out there. And so, yeah, and then, we talk about missed opportunities. What haven't we done as a community? Is there something that we can do? Because, the comment about taking care of that person and getting them up to where they're healthy, many times when I'm working with someone and they reach that point, the first thing they talk to me about is giving back, and so it's like paying it forward, and it generates a cycle where people decide that, I can give back, and in that process, someone else discovers that they can give back too.
There's one
does
piece
have a
of
large
data
payoff.
I think that really supports what you're saying in the Juneau Vulnerability Assessment, and I know that's available on the Homeless Coalition's website. And that is the number of people who were on the streets who reported having previously gone through foster care. And we'll sometimes ask ourselves as a society, what happens to those kids who age out of foster care? Once you hit 18, the foster care system just kind of releases you, and so we know what happens to those folks. People who have very traumatic childhood experiences, and then if we're not able to provide the right supports for them to get what they need and to move into adulthood, they oftentimes fall into the things that we're talking about today, addiction or untreated mental illness. And so that was one of the highest numbers on Juneau's vulnerability assessment, was people saying that they'd previously been in foster care.
We just have a few minutes left, but I wanted to get back to the idea of, matching the individual to the treatment option. And maybe Jeannette or Jennifer can talk a little bit about how do you do that? What process do you go through to really nail it down?
Well, I would say that it's definitely a very individual process, and so the first thing to do is to sit down with an individual and find out what their goals are and what their needs are. And I might look at somebody and say, oh, well, you have this and this and this, and so you need this and this and this. But really, it has to start with the individual. And is their primary concern their homelessness? Is their primary concern their chemical dependency? Is their primary concern that they want to find a job? And so looking at them, and if you can allow them to kind of guide what they need, then the rest of it will ultimately fall into place. But you have to start where they're at and figure out what it is that they are asking for and try to. And it's what you talked about with the Housing First model, is saying, we're going to provide this, and then you guide us to help you get what you need to improve your status, your situation, your condition.
All right.
I completely agree. It's about engaging and becoming partners in care together.
Great. And Mariya, do you, when you're dealing with these populations, do you have strategies for matching them with service providers?
We rely very heavily on our partner agencies, and we refer people out for services. We have various partner agencies like Front Street Community Health Center, Juneau Youth Services come in and provide care to our patrons on site. We do have limited case management, but I just could not agree more. Just you really need to see where the person is at, respect them, and then develop a plan that is individualized and works for them. But without housing, it's really hard to keep on following through with the plan.
Right.
Yeah.
I do have one question. What about the folks who not only struggle with alcohol and or drug addiction, but what about the ones who have a criminal record? Because some housing, like Alaska housing, if you have a felon, you're not eligible. And same with Clinton Ida housing, if you got a felony on your record, that some people have a really bad past, and they're wanting to change and yet they're not eligible for services. How can a person get around that?
Well, I know that at the Glory Hole we do not ask people about their criminal record. We have no idea. As far as the Housing First projects in Anchorage and Fairbanks, I'm not sure, so I would let Nancy speak to that.
It becomes a little bit of a tricky thing to do when you mix federal funding, which sometimes carries some of those requirements. It's a good thing to ask the housing provider because sometimes housing organizations will add on things that are not strictly forbidden, and but it comes down to what Bruce said about having that relationship with a landlord and that landlord feeling comfortable that someone will pick up the phone when I say, you know, Nancy's having a hard day, I need someone to come see her right now, that someone will be able to respond. I work with communities in identifying those landlords that we think are interested in helping people in addition to getting the rent. Every landlord needs to get their rent. But those who are interested in maybe providing an extra hand to someone might be a little bit more flexible, and they might work with somebody who has a prior criminal record but is addressing those concerns.
I think there's a good question in that. As a community, we have to decide what we're going to do. Someone's coming out of the Department of Correction after having served their sentence, we've decided that that's what they need to do to pay for the crime that they committed, and they do that. And then we don't give them supports when they come out. What choice do we leave them with, and what choices are we making?
Right.
Well, we're just about 4 minutes left in the program. I just wanted to get some final thoughts from each of you, and we'll start with you, Bruce. Do you have any final thoughts, or do you want to?
I've ever had a final thought.
You want to put a little bow on everything?
No. It's really great to be up here with our partners and to be able to discuss this in a community forum. And we do have members of our community that we need to help.
Mm-hmm. John, final thought?
Well, I definitely agree. Since I'm a faith-based individual, I'm aware of different churches throughout the community that are also helping in this aspect too, such as Love Inc. and various other programs and different ministries. So, you know, that's another idea too.
Faith-based.
Yeah.
Jennifer?
I appreciate being a part of this with everyone, and I think that we have a lot of work yet to do in this area, and I think one of the things we didn't talk about here too is just breaking down the stigma still of substance treatment and or substance use disorders, and also mental illness.
Jeannette?
Right. I agree with Jennifer and everybody here as well, and breaking down the stigma of homelessness. Mm-hmm. And I think that Juneau has been trying to do a lot of work to bring a Housing First project in, and I think that we definitely need to continue that and work together as a community and as a state, because I think it's absolutely vital that we have that service here, and I think it could really lead to some great improvements in individuals' lives and in our community.
Okay, Mariya, final thought?
Thank you very much for having me. It's really great to be here. And yes, I think that, you know, we need housing for everyone, because when you are housed, you're not homeless. I stole it from Nancy.
No, that is my line.
Sorry, but totally.
Housing is actually the cure for homelessness.
Nancy, is that your final thought?
That's my line. It's not rocket science.
All right. Well, that is all the time that we have for this program. Thanks to all of our panelists. You guys were great. Thanks for our live studio audience for some really great questions. I want to thank our crew, Miko Wilson, Diane Martin, Chris Stargan, Jeremy Shea, and Sarah Yu. And thanks for joining us online and on 360 North TV. Good night.
This has been a Roof Town Hall discussion recorded July 22, 2014 at 360 in Juneau. It was produced by KTOO Public Media and 360 North. A Roof is funded by the Public Affairs Fund for Homelessness and Appropriate Affordable Housing. Contributors include the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, and the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, Juneau, in partnership with the Juneau Clean Air Coalition.